everybody, it's Carolyn from Homesteading Family, and you know what? Spring is in full blast around here. We have the plants going in the ground, we've got cherry trees blossoming, we just are really starting to feel spring. And so do you guys know what next season is? Next season is preserving season, right? You work so hard to get all those gardens in and to grow all that fruit, and then it's time to bring it into the kitchen and get it preserved so that you can have a supply of food for your family when the garden isn't being productive. One way that we do a lot of that here at Homesteading Family is by canning. And so every spring, right about this time, as I start seeing the cherry trees blossom, then I know it's time to restock my canning supplies. Now, we do a lot of other preserving here at Homesteading Family. We do a lot of fermenting and dehydrating, salting, all sorts of different things. But today we are going to be talking about getting ready for canning season. I know it seems a little bit early. Maybe some of you down south are already canning things. Up here, it's right around the corner because cherries are usually coming in by the end of June. And so if I'm gonna order stuff, I need to make sure I've got it coming now so I don't have to scramble last minute. One of the things that is really important to our family here is saving money by being prepared ahead of time and by buying things bulk. And when I buy things bulk, I try to buy everything possible bulk. And that includes things like my canning lids. So I'm going to take you through what I get every year before it's canning season. Now, of course, the first thing that you need to do is check your supply of jars. You need to know that you have enough jars to meet your goals this year, and jars that are in good shape, right? You always have some breakage over a year, especially if you do very much canning. You're going to have some chips and some nicks and some cracks and things you're just going to have to throw away. So make sure you have a few extra just to make up for any loss from last year. And you know, if you need to upscale it all and get a little bit more, go ahead and order those, especially if you can go order them at the early end of the season from your local hardware store or wherever you buy your canning goods. A lot of times you'll find really great sales. And if you know, hey, you know, I really need 2 more cases, 10 more cases, you know, some years I've had to buy 20 cases of jars. And you know, you can save a lot of money by getting that on the early canning sales rather than waiting until jars are getting scarce and the price goes up to full price. So the other thing you need to check is your canners. If you're going to be using a pressure canner this season that has any sort of gaskets or seals, make sure you have backups of those. Every year I need to check that I have my jigglers and my weights, because somehow I have lost these so many times. Little toddlers come by when I've set it down somewhere and just kind of wander off with them. And so I think, you know, maybe someday some archaeologist is going to be in my yard and digging up a whole bunch of weighted jigglers for my pressure canner and wonder what that was all about. So I need to keep an eye on these every year and make sure if I need to order more and have at least one as a backup, I'm ready to go. Another thing to check is to make sure that you have any sort of wire basket insert or double tier, you know, the trays that go in between the tiers in larger pressure canners. If you're using any of those, just double check, make sure everything's in good order. Now, one of the things that I use a lot of here, and anybody who is canning uses a lot of, is your flat lids. And of course, every year you really need to be buying most of these fresh. I do say most because there are some exceptions. Of course, the you know, Ball Blue Book, who owns Ball, who makes the lids, doesn't really want to tell you that there are some times that you can reuse your lids. We'll talk about that in another video. But for most things, and especially pressure can things, you absolutely must have fresh lids if you're using these instead of a reusable. So I go ahead and I buy them bulk, and I mean bulk. This is a sleeve. Let's see, this is the wide mouth lids. And it's expensive to buy so many all at one time, but per unit it is much cheaper than buying those tiny little boxes. Now I buy these from layman's.com, and in the early side of the season they often have sales and you can get a really good price. I will get these bulk several sleeves a year in both sizes, both in the wide mouth and the regular for all of my jars. Of course, you'll also need your rings, but because these rings only need to be down on while the product is being canned and then cooled, you don't need so many of these. So just make sure you have, you know, for most people, several dozen is good. Sometimes I have days where I'm actually canning 100+ jars. So I have to make sure that I have enough for that and for whatever I'm starting the next day. If I'm right in one of those really crunch seasons and I'm doing a lot of canning. A lot of times applesauce and apple cider, that's the kind of time where I'm doing a lot all at once and it goes fast. So make sure you have enough of those. I never go into a canning season without 2 of these on hand. These are the jar lifters. I do not want to have, and I have had these break right in the middle of a canning project. And I've always been so thankful when I have a backup one, just to go ahead and pick up my jars out of that boiling water. Believe me, I've tried to do it without one of these. You probably have too if you've canned it all. And it's not any fun, it's not worth it, and it's so easy to drop jars when you're not using one of these. So make sure you have 2 of these on hand. One is a backup in case something happens to the first. The other thing I will not be without during canning season is my magic magnetic wand. This is my kitchen fairy wand. And I don't do anything with boiling water and jar lids without one of these things to pick my lids up out of that boiling water so that I can then get it onto my jars that are warm. This saves a lot of burnt fingers, and I always have 2 of these on hand just in case. 1, in case it breaks, but 2, I now have daughters who are getting old enough to help, and when all of a sudden you have 2 and 3 people in your kitchen who are able to work all at the same time, wow, you can go a lot faster. We also have tons of company coming in and out of our kitchen, and you know, I just put people to work now. I love having company here, but I've got a lot to get done. So you're gonna get one of these put in your hands if you come to visit our kitchen during canning season. So other things that you have to have. You need to have your funnel. Please, if you can, go ahead and get the stainless steel. Don't get the cheap plastic ones. They take on bacteria, they take on flavors. It's just not worth it. Now that said, I have my main one, and I do have, actually, I think I have 2 or 3 backups of these that I have just gotten over the years at thrift stores or wherever I run into them. And you know, it's always good to have a backup in a second. Again, if you have somebody helping you, it can go really a lot faster if you have multiple tools. But this is what I use. This is where my heart is. I love these nice stainless steel ones. Okay, now, the most important tool. Every year on the homestead, I get a whole box of my black Sharpies. Nothing gets put on the shelf without being labeled, even if it looks so obvious as to what it is that I think it's silly to label it. I still label it. Every jar that gets put away that has been canned in this house, at the very least, gets the year written on it. And I just write right on the top of my flat lids here and just go ahead and put it in storage. I don't do anything fancy with labels. I found that they are an absolute pain to get off your jars when you want to use them the next year. So I don't use labels anymore. I used to do all sorts of really cute things, and I just decided, you know what? The food itself looks really good. It's really fancy enough. I don't need to add to it. Okay, now down to the nitty-gritty. Every year we make quite a bit of jams and jellies, and some of those are really easy to do without pectin, but others not so much. You really want to be able to have pectin. So, you know, I used to go to the store and buy these little tiny, seriously overpriced things, either the ball, the Sure Gel, there's several different ones. And oh, it was so expensive to buy it this way. I got so tired of spending money like this. Plus, all of the recipes on these are both no sugar needed, fruit pectin, or low sugar. So that's better because then you have a little bit more control over the amount of sugar you put in. But the normal ones you find at the store require huge amounts of sugar. And I just don't want to feed my family that much sugar. Plus, I would actually like to taste the fruit and not just the sugar. So what I have gone to doing is using all Pomona's pectin and buying it bulk. Now, one of the benefits to Pomona's pectin is that it's not a sugar-based pectin. That means it gels regardless of the sugar. And so there are some difficulties with pectin, with Pomona's though too. One of which is that you have to use recipes kind of specific to Pomona's. You could not take the recipe packet from Ball and just substitute Pomona's. It wouldn't work. So that's kind of the downside of that. On the other hand, they are very clear in your directions with Pomona's how to make your own recipes. And you do have to be very careful to follow those, because if you add too much sugar into your jam, it can cause it not to gel. That said, I buy this bulk every year. A packet this size will often, I think this is a pound, will often last me 1.5 to 2 years of making jams and jellies. And you know, it's just so nice to have what I need on hand. It's completely shelf stable. It will last for years, so no problem just putting it in your pantry or your freezer for the next year. This is just sat on the pantry shelf over winter and ready to go. Another thing, if you're gonna make any sort of thickened gravy, as you know, the recipes have kind of changed and the safety precautions have changed over the last few years, and they are not any longer recommending either regular cornstarch or regular flour. Now, I've got to say, I know a lot of people who still use those things and have used them forever, and their mothers have used them forever, and their grandmothers have used them forever, and I have never once heard of anybody having a food problem with that. However, this is a really great way to go, and I really like this. This is Cornabee's Thick Gel. It's a little bit expensive, but I really like this because it's completely non-GMO. I don't have to worry about the GMO corn. I don't have to worry about the GMO additives that are being put into thickeners. I really appreciate this. This is made out of an heirloom corn product. So this is great. We do a lot of cherry pie filling, apple pie filling. You could do things like chicken pot pie filling with a thickened gravy in it, any sort of gravy sort of things. This is a recommended product because this has that modified food starch. Now, oftentimes we hear that term modified food starch and we associate that with genetically modified food, and that's just not the case in this. It just means something different. They've taken that food starch and they've changed it a little bit, but this is made from all heirloom corn, this particular brand. And so I buy this by the case every year. Some years, last year, we didn't end up doing so much. We didn't need quite as much, so I actually have about 4 bags of this left over, but I always want to make sure I have a lot on hand in case somebody calls and says, hey, I've got another cherry tree for you to come pick if you want to come get these cherries. And then, you know, I can have some extra pie filling or whatever it is on the shelf. It's so handy. You can also use this in your regular everyday cooking. It doesn't just have to be for canning. If you need to thicken something at Thanksgiving time, if I'm making a gravy and I have gluten-free people in the house, you know, a lot of times I don't have arrowroot on hand, I can go ahead and use this and make up a quick gravy or a sauce, and it's really handy to have. So those are the basic things that I just make sure I always have on hand when I'm going into a canning season, and I recommend that you look at buying them bulk because one, they last on your shelf really well, and it's always good to have more supplies rather than less so that you don't end up having to run to the store in the middle of a canning project. And two, you can control your ingredients a lot better when you're thinking about them ahead of time. You know, which one is non-GMO, which one's not, which one is healthier for me. If you're standing at the grocery store, it's a lot harder to make those decisions and do the research. And three, so that you can save money, because when you're buying bulk, it saves you a lot of money. So get ready for a great canning season. I'm so excited. We kick it off here with rhubarb and cherries up in the next few weeks, and we're gonna get going. So I'm gonna be buying my supplies. I will put the links to the places where I am buying them this year down below in the description, so that you guys can follow that and order your own, or maybe you can find better prices somewhere else. If you do, share them with us in the comments so that we can all find these better prices too. Thank you guys. For more videos like these, sign up at www.homesteadingfamily.com. Also, follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.